No matter what form of yoga you practice, the mind is part of it. Even if you practice only postural yoga, then nonetheless, nowadays we understand that yoga is the union of the mind and body and the breath. The mind is in there too. You know, your conscious awareness of your body and the things that it's doing is the key aspect of what makes it yoga as opposed to some other fitness modality. If we look at the classical definition of yoga in Patanjali Sutras, Sutra 1-2, yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. That's what yoga is. I wanted to look at this and what's assumed as what is mind, chitta, and also if mind needs to be stilled, or the fluctuations of the mind need to be stilled, does that mean that they are harmful or a hindrance in some way? I am going to say no to start off, like spoiler, is because in yoga, nothing is ever inherently bad. You know, that's not the way that the yoga system sees the world. But it depends how you use the things that you've got. The other thing is that the word mind in English, it's not very precise. When you think about these words, they don't really conjure up a very clear understanding of what's going on inside the noggin. In the Indian tradition, however, they have a lot more precise definitions. That's how they like to work. They like to be quite clear about the terminology of what we're working with. And especially since mind is one of the main materials that we're working with in the yoga practice. So in the same way that when you're going to drive a car, you're going to have some driving lessons. You learn something about the workings of the car and how to work a clutch if you drive a manual, for example, or, you know, the way that gears work, whatever. In the same way, if you're going to work with mind, we need a user's manual to maybe crash into stuff a little bit less. And so I'm going to break down a little bit what the yoga tradition understands as mind. Some of the things which are kind of assumed as understood by the Yoga Sutras, but not unpacked within the actual text of the sutras, because the sutras were based on, in part, on a system called Sankhya, which is a sister philosophical system for breaking down reality and how it functions. Within this Sankhya system, mind is understood to have three different aspects, which yoga understands kind of work together with each other. So let's go ahead and look at what these aspects are. Number 1, manas. Number 2, ahamkara. And number 3, buddhi. Now let's look at each one in turn. Manas. It actually comes from the verbal root man, which means to think, and it gives us the cognate word mental and mind actually in English, but it has a much more precise definition than our word mind. It actually is the part of your mind which processes sensory information. So your senses are like the portals out into the world. They take in visual information, audio information, aromas, touch, concrete material information, and then it brings it into the processing space of your mind. So the manas is the crudest of these three because it's just taking material stuff and getting it into your subtle mind. It's kind of like the interface between you and the outside world. And it's also, is associated with quite quick reactions. So the classical example is if you went into a darkened or dim room and there was something curled up on the floor and you go, ah, snake, but it's not actually a snake, it's just a curled up rope. What the body does, and this manas, it gives you a quick reaction to protect you, act first, jump first, and then analyze later. So in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, Krishna talks all the time about harnessing and controlling your manas, because that is the interface between you in your inner palace and the outside world and all of its fluctuating influences, changing all the time. Right, so let's move on to Ahamkara. This word breaks down into two parts. Aham, which means I, it's a pronoun, and kara, which is from the verbal root kr, to make. So it's the I maker. Sometimes this is translated as ego, but it's maybe not the most useful way of thinking about it, just because in the English and European and Western tradition, the word ego has a lot of like associations and nuances due to Freud and how he used this word, which don't necessarily exist within the Indian tradition. So I always think about it as literally the I maker, or maybe the individuation principle, if you like. And this is basically the part of your, your sense of self, what makes you feel like you, what separates you from the outside world. And for example, so if manas is your mind going, I see a cup, then ahamkara goes, this cup is mine. Haha. So you can watch children, for example, at a young age, when they become toddlers, like the age of 2, for example, going, mine, mine. That's their ahamkara, like coming into full blossoming. And so just like in a toddler, you can see that ahamkara can be useful. It understands that you are a separate unit from the world, and that helps you to move through the world with safety and security, and also create healthy boundaries and move through the world, cut a line in, express your personal, the stuff that you have to bring to the world, which is different from anyone else, which is, why we're here. But it can sometimes be a bit overactive, and sometimes we kind of get a little bit too caught up in notions of what our self is, which stop us from being able to see reality. So if you're very stubborn, you're like, I'm always right and I don't care what you say. That's the ahamkara being overactive. On the other hand, it can be ideas of like, I'm not good enough and I can't do that because blah. That's the ahamkara. Or my favorite example is, oh, I'm not the kind of person to do yoga. Of course, I'm a yoga teacher. I would say that yoga is for everyone. But in the same way, what is it that's holding you back? Probably fear comes from ahamkara. I would suggest. So sometimes it can be something that we need to balance and navigate so that it can be efficient and help us on our way without holding us back. So the third aspect of mind is the buddhi. And you might recognize this word. It looks a lot like Buddha. And of course, it is from the same verbal root, bud, which means to understand, also to wake up. And so this, I kind of associate it for myself with the prefrontal cortex, or the watchtower of your brain, the aspect of your mind which is cognitively thinking, the intelligence, it makes decisions, it makes analysis, judgment, discrimination, knowledge. And so if you've got your cup example, the manas says, this is a cup. Ahamkara says, this is my cup. And then the buddhi says, out of this cup, I'm only going to drink water and green tea because I'm going to make healthy decisions for my life, or whatever you want, right? The buddhi also, interestingly, strategizes over the input and decides whether or not it goes with our dharma, which means that it decides whether or not something is the right thing for us to do. So it makes these decisions about the world, about whether something is appropriate for us or not. And it can't work, obviously, without the other two, which is really nice. So we can actually see as well, even in the texts, that the mind, and in particular the buddhi, is a tool for liberation. So in chapter 2 of the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali talks about how the main hindrance to liberation is avidya, ignorance. That is the false belief that we're separate from the world, which you can see that ahamkara kind of plays a big part in that. And buddhi, the part of your intelligence that allows you to have insight, allows you to get past that. And in the Bhagavad Gita as well, Krishna says there's a lot of overlap with this philosophy between these texts. But the Krishna says, they say that the senses are important. Higher than the senses is the mind, manas. Greater than the mind, manas, is the intelligence, buddhi. But this, like the supreme, the purusha, this is higher than the intelligence even. So it's like this, when we can understand, so it's your buddhi right now, which is watching this video, by the way. And then your ahamkara goes, what's this got to do with me? I don't know. Your buddhi is trying to kind of understand all of this. And your buddhi is the one that kind of observes the level of your own mind. And when you can start to observe these different aspects of your mind functioning, and how they are active in different parts of your life, you can start to see that they're just aspects of something and maybe not exactly you. That maybe there's something behind that. That maybe there's a light that shines out through these tools, which are the mind. Because if we've got a tool, there's got to be someone operating it, or something, or, you know. I find that it's just nice to kind of organize my experience of my mental space and understand with a little bit more separation and dispassion what's going on. And it kind of helps me feel a little bit less nuts. I hope that that might be a result for you of this as well. Something to contemplate, something to be aware of. But also just knowing that your mind is a wonderful tool, something to love, but also to know that it's not the entire part of you, that we can maybe on our yoga journey and our practice, see if we can go beyond, even for a glimpse, even for a millisecond, to see that magic which shines through these lenses of our eyes and our senses and our mind. So until next time on our discovery journey of mind, reality, and yoga and all of that, I wish you well. Om Shanti.